The converter is 6 feet tall and shaped like a pear that's been left in the rain too long. If stories of industrial deception and the inventors who changed manufacturing forever are your kind of history, subscribe now. There is much more to uncover. Clay-lined on the inside, fire-scarred on the outside, mounted on a pair of iron trunnions that allow it to tilt forward over a casting pit. A pit that's currently empty, waiting for something that doesn't exist yet. Cheap steel. Steel at the price of iron. Steel by the ton instead of the pound. It's 1856, and in this cramped shed on Carlisle Street East in Sheffield, a man named Henry Bessemer believes he's built the machine that will end the Iron Age. Obed Harshaw doesn't believe a word of it. He's standing in the doorway of Baxter House Works with his puddling tongs over one shoulder. 5 feet of iron worn smooth at the grips from 20 years of wrestling molten metal in the Black Country. And he's looking at the converter the way a farrier looks at a steam horse. Interesting. Probably yampy. Definitely going to hurt somebody. He's here because puddling is killing him. 20 years of standing over a reverberatory furnace, stirring 400-pound charges of pig iron with a long iron bar, turning the metal over and over while the carbon burns away. It's strong work, the strongest in any foundry. A good puddler earns more than a clerk and dies younger than a coal miner. Obed's lungs have started making a sound when he breathes deeply, a sound like paper tearing, very slowly, somewhere inside his chest. The converter doesn't need puddling, that's the point. You pour molten pig iron into the belly of it, you blast air through 7 holes in the bottom, tuyères they're called, clay nozzles the width of a man's thumb, and the air does the work. The oxygen in the air finds the carbon in the iron and burns it out. No stirring, no bar, no human being standing over liquid metal for 4 hours, slowly cooking. Bessemer showed the process to the British Association in Cheltenham 3 weeks ago. Read a paper entitled The Manufacture of Malleable Iron and Steel Without Fuel. The iron masters in the audience heard the title and leaned forward. Without fuel? Steel without fuel? The fuel, the coke, the coal, the endless tonnage of carbon burned to heat iron to working temperature is half the cost of making steel. Eliminate the fuel and you've halved the price. Halve the price and you've changed the world. Obed watches the first blow. Bessemer himself operates the air valve, a wheel on the side of the converter that opens the blast. Molten pig iron sits in the belly of the pear. The air goes in, and the converter screams. It's not a sound any iron worker has heard before. Not the rhythmic thump of a trip hammer, or the hiss of quenching, or the roar of a blast furnace. It's a scream, a continuous rising shriek of air forcing itself through liquid metal at pressure. Sparks erupt from the converter's mouth in a fountain. Not sparks, flames. The carbon in the iron is burning. The silicon is burning. Everything that isn't pure iron is combusting inside that clay-lined pear. And the temperature is rising, not falling. The iron is getting hotter without any fuel. The air itself is the fuel. Obed's hand, without instruction from his brain, reaches out and touches the converter's outer wall. Hot, getting hotter. His palm reads what the thermometer on the workbench confirms 3 seconds later. The temperature inside has passed 1,500 degrees and is still climbing. Asa Gedling, Bessemer's lab assistant, a thin young man from Nottingham with wire-rimmed spectacles and ink on his fingers, catches Obed's eye and holds up a pocket notebook. The page shows a column of chemical symbols and a single word circled twice: phosphorus. Asa points at the notebook, then at the converter, then makes a face that suggests something important and complicated. Obed ignores him. Chemistry is for men who don't get their hands dirty. The blow takes 18 minutes. Bessemer tilts the converter forward. Liquid steel pours into the casting mold, bright as sunlight, clean. The ingot, when it cools, is tested with a file. The file skates across the surface like it's been waxed. This is not iron. This is steel, made in 18 minutes from pig iron using nothing but air. Then Bessemer says the sentence that destroys everything. Let's try it with the local iron. The local iron, from Rotherham, from Derbyshire, from Wales, goes into the converter. The blast goes in, the scream rises, the sparks fly, and when the metal pours out, it isn't steel, it's something else. Something that looks right, but breaks wrong. Obed picks up the test ingot, taps it with a hammer, and watches it crack clean through like a biscuit. Bessemer's face goes white. Asa Gedling opens his notebook to the phosphorus page and says quietly, "The thing is, nobody listens." The word arrives in print before it arrives in person. Fraud. Published in the Times, signed by Cornelius Pym of the Dowless Iron Company. Written in the particular prose of a wealthy man who has lost 27,000 pounds and wants the world to share his anger. Pym isn't a fool. He's an ironmaster who employs 400 men at Dulé, one of the largest ironworks in Wales, producing 30,000 tons of pig iron annually from ore mined in the hills above Merthyr Tydfil. He licensed Bessemer's process in good faith. He followed the instructions precisely. He built a converter to Bessemer's specifications, charged it with Dulé pig iron, opened the blast, and produced nothing usable. Cold short steel that snapped in frost, brittle garbage. And Pym isn't alone. Ebu Vale tried it, failed. Butterley tried it, failed. Every ironmaster who licensed the Bessemer process and used their own local iron got the same result. Steel that looked right, tested right at forging temperature, and crumbled the moment it cooled below red heat. 12 licensees, 12 failures. The only successful blow, the demonstration at Baxter House, used Swedish iron imported at considerable expense. The thing is, and this is what Asa Gedling has been trying to tell anyone who'll listen since the first failed blow, the problem isn't the converter. The problem is the iron. Specifically, the phosphorus in the iron. Welsh iron, Derbyshire iron, most British iron is smelted from ores that contain between 0.5% and 2% phosphorus. Swedish iron comes from ores that contain almost none. The converter burns out carbon and silicon beautifully. It cannot burn out phosphorus. And phosphorus in steel makes it cold short, strong when hot, shatteringly brittle when cold. But Asa is 24 years old, has no university degree, and has ink stains on his fingers where soot should be. Nobody at Dowla wants to hear a Nottingham lad's chemistry lecture. They want their 27,000 pounds back. The fifth blow at Baxter House goes wrong in a new way. Obed is operating the air valve. He's learned the timing now, can feel through the vibration in the trunnion shaft when the carbon's burned through, and the converter lurches, a crack in the clay lining. Air, instead of going through the two airs into the iron, punches sideways through the crack and hits the molten bath at an angle that throws a tongue of liquid metal out of the converter's mouth. The metal hits the wall 6 feet away in a splash pattern that hardens instantly. A frozen explosion of steel droplets embedded in brickwork. Obed throws himself sideways. A gobbet of 1,500-degree steel passes through the space where his right ear was a half second earlier and hits the floor with a sound like a gunshot. When it's over, Obed is on his knees in the casting pit, slag in his hair, a burn across his left shoulder where a spark found the gap between collar and skin. Asa is pressed against the far wall, spectacles cracked, notebook still clutched in both hands like a hymn.
That went well.
Define well.
Nobody's dead.
It isn't funny, but it's the only language available to men who've just watched 2 tons of molten iron try to kill them and who plan to do the same thing again tomorrow. Gallows humor is the sound a man makes when admitting fear would be more dangerous than the furnace. Nella comes to the works that evening. She stands in the doorway, the same doorway where Obed stood 2 months ago with his puddling tongs, and looks at the burn on his shoulder, the slag in his hair, the cracked lining of the converter, the splash pattern on the wall. She doesn't say anything. She touches the burn with 2 fingers. Her touch says everything her mouth won't. This is killing you too, just faster. Bessemer calls a meeting, the workshop. 6 men remaining. Obed, Asa, 4 laborers who haven't found other work yet. He stands beside the converter and tells them the truth. The licensees have withdrawn. The money is nearly gone. The Times has called him a fraud, and the Royal Society won't return his correspondence. Then Bessemer says, 1 more year. If we haven't solved it in 1 more year, I'll stop. Obed looks at the converter, at his puddling tongs, leaning against the wall where he left them on his first day. Untouched, unneeded. A relic of the old way of making iron. He could go back to puddling. His lungs would kill him in 10 years. The converter might kill him next week. But the converter, if it works, changes everything. Steel at the price of iron. Rails that don't crack. Bridges that don't collapse. Ships that don't break. He stays. January. Sheffield in winter smells like coal smoke and tastes like iron filings. The Baxter House Works runs on a skeleton crew. Obed, Asa, 2 laborers named Chalk and Brennan, and they run the converter 3 times a week, testing different iron sources, different blast pressures, different lining compositions. Every failed ingot goes onto a growing pile outside the workshop door. Obed calls it the monument to stupidity. Asa calls it data. The breakthrough doesn't arrive as a flash of genius. It arrives as a column of numbers in Asa Gedling's leather-bound notebook, presented to Obed at 6 in the morning over 10 mugs of tea so strong it could strip paint.
The thing is, and I know you don't want to hear this, I've tested every failed ingot for phosphorus. Every single one. Dowless iron, 1.6%. Butterley iron, 1.1%. Derbyshire iron, 0.8%, and every one of them came out cold short. The Swedish iron, 0.03% phosphorus. That's the difference. That's the whole difference.
Obed stares at the notebook. He can read numbers. The column is clear. High phosphorus on the left, failure on the right. Low phosphorus, success. It's so obvious that the only reason nobody's solved it is that iron masters don't test their iron for phosphorus. They test for carbon, for silicon, for sulfur. Phosphorus has always been there, invisible, irrelevant in wrought iron production where it causes minor problems. In Bessemer steel, it's catastrophic. Obed's first instinct is resistance. 20 years of puddling have taught him that iron's problems are physical. Temperature, timing, technique. You fix iron with your hands, not with a chemistry notebook. But the numbers don't lie. And his hands, for all their 20 years of knowledge, produce the same brittle garbage every other iron master produced. The converter isn't broken. The iron is wrong. He reads the notebook. All of it. Asa's handwriting is cramped and certain. The hand of a man who's been right about this for 6 months and hasn't been heard. Phosphorus enters the iron from the ore. Certain ores, Swedish, Spanish, some Russian, are naturally low in phosphorus. The converter works perfectly with these ores. Most British ores are high in phosphorus. The converter cannot remove phosphorus. It removes carbon and silicon. Phosphorus stays. And phosphorus in steel is death. If you've watched a man burn himself for 2 years on a machine nobody believes in, you already know whether you're staying. Subscribe. The Pour is next. Bessemer secures a shipment of Swedish pig iron, hematite ore, smelted in charcoal furnaces near Gavle. The iron arrives at Baxter House in crates marked with Swedish custom stamps. Gray pigs, each weighing 40 pounds, stacked in the workshop like ingots of possibility. They run the test blow on a Tuesday. Obed operates the valve. The converter screams, that same banshee shriek of air through liquid metal. The sparks fly, the carbon burns. 18 minutes. When the metal pours, it pours different. Obed knows this in his hands before the test confirms it. The viscosity is wrong. No, not wrong, right. The metal flows like cream instead of like treacle. There's no sputtering, no unexpected variation, just clean, fluid, blindingly bright liquid steel. The test ingot comes out of the mold at 7 that evening. Asa files it. The file skates. Obed taps it with a hammer. Not gently, not the careful diagnostic tap of a man who expects failure, but a strike, a proper hit, the kind that cracks cold, short steel like crockery. The ingot rings. Clean, high, sustained, the sound of steel. Not the dead thud of brittle garbage, not the dull clunk of wrought iron. The bell ring of proper steel that wants to sing under a hammer instead of breaking. Obed holds the ingot up. 2 pounds. A lump of blue-gray metal the size of his fist. It's the first piece of correct Bessemer steel produced in Britain from understood principles. Not luck, not the right shipment happening to show up, but knowledge. Asa's chemistry, Obed's craft, Swedish iron. But it's 2 pounds. The converter holds 2 tons. Scaling from 2 pounds to 2 tons is the difference between lighting a candle and building a bonfire. Every variable multiplies, every flaw amplifies. The lining that held for a 2-pound test might crack under the heat of a full charge. The tuyeres that delivered enough air for a small batch might starve a large one. Nella reads Pim's letter from the Times. Someone's left a copy at the chandler's shop downstairs. She reads it aloud to Obed over supper. The most audacious fraud since the South Sea bubble. She looks at her husband's burned shoulder, his missing finger joint, the permanent smell of hot iron in his clothes.
Well, at least they spelled your name wrong. That's something.
They didn't mention my name.
Exactly.
He pins the letter to the workshop wall the next morning. Beside it, he places the 2-pound steel ingot, proof and accusation, side by side. March. The full charge test. 2 tons of Swedish pig iron melted in a cupola furnace and poured into the converter's belly in a single stream of white-hot metal that lights the workshop like a second sun. Obed stands at the air valve. Chalk and Brennan man the trunnion mechanism that will tilt the converter for pouring. Asa watches from behind a brick blast shield with a thermometer, a stopwatch, and his notebook. The blast goes in. The converter screams. And this time, for the first time in 14 months of full charge testing, the scream is even. Not the jagged, irregular shriek of iron that's fighting the process. A sustained, controlled roar. The sparks from the mouth are consistent. A steady fountain of burning carbon. Orange-white. The color of a process that's working the way Bessemer's mathematics said it should. Obed's right hand is on the air valve. His left is flat against the converter's outer wall. The thermometer on the workbench reads 1600 degrees and climbing. But the thermometer is wrong. The mercury column is sticking, caught on an imperfection in the glass tube, reading 50 degrees below the actual temperature. Obed doesn't know the thermometer is wrong, but his palm does. His 20 years of molten metal instinct feel the wall temperature rising faster than the thermometer shows, and his hand, his burned, scarred puddler's hand, makes the decision before his brain engages. He opens the valve another quarter turn. More air. The temperature spike, which would have overheated the charge and burned out too much carbon, producing iron instead of steel, breaks. The temperature stabilizes. Obed has corrected a problem he didn't consciously identify, using a skill he didn't know he possessed, in a process he spent 6 months refusing to trust. The thing about iron and steel is that they don't care who's right. They don't care about newspaper letters or licensing fees or scientific reputations. The metal cares about temperature, time, and composition. Get those 3 things correct and the metal gives you steel. Get any one of them wrong and the metal gives you scrap. Bessemer's genius was the converter. Pim's complaint was legitimate. The process fails with phosphoric iron. Asa's chemistry solved the input problem. And Obed's hands, those burned, broken, 20-year educated hands, solved the process problems that mathematics can't predict.
The heart of it all takes iron.
14 minutes in, the sparks change color. This is the moment, the carbon drop, when the iron's carbon content passes through the narrow band that separates steel from iron. Too little carbon, you've made wrought iron, which is what you started trying to avoid. Too much carbon, you've made cast iron, brittle and useless for rails. The window is narrow, between 0.2% and 1.5% carbon, and it closes in 90 seconds. Obed watches the sparks. He's seen this moment 100 times in test blows. The flame shortens. The sparks go from orange-white to lemon-yellow. The scream drops in pitch. Barely, a quarter tone. The kind of change you'd miss if you hadn't been listening to this machine every day for 2 years. He closes the valve. The blast stops. The silence, after 18 minutes of continuous screaming metal, feels like a physical substance. It has weight, texture, the particular quality of a room that's been violently loud and has suddenly stopped. Chalk and Brennan crank the trunnion. The converter tilts. The mouth comes forward over the casting pit, and the steel pours. It pours like nothing Obed has seen in 20 years of ironwork. White, fluid, steady. No sputtering, no spitting, no sudden explosions of trapped gas. A smooth, continuous stream of 2,000-degree liquid steel, filling the casting mold with the particular sound of heavy cream hitting porcelain, a viscous, musical glug. The ingot weighs 1,900 pounds when they strip the mold the next morning. Blue-gray surface. Obed notices the color, a faint blue sheen on the steel's skin. The color of tempered metal. The color of carbon content that's exactly, precisely, impossibly correct. He strikes it with a hammer. The ring fills the workshop. Sustained, clear. The metallurgical equivalent of a choir hitting a perfect note. Asa tests it with a file, a bending press, a drop test. Every result, steel. Proper, usable, structural steel. Made in 18 minutes from pig iron, using nothing but air and the right iron source. Bessemer prints the results, sends them to every ironmaster who called him a fraud, including Cornelius Pym. The difference is explained. Phosphorus. Use low phosphorus iron and the converter produces steel at 7 pounds per ton, 1/8 the price of crucible steel. Use phosphoric iron and you get brittle garbage. Bessemer wasn't a fraud, he was incomplete. The process was real, the understanding was partial. The American railroads don't care about partial understanding. They care about price. And at 7 pounds per ton, Bessemer steel rails are cheaper than wrought iron rails and last 10 times longer. By 1870, every new railroad in America is laid on Bessemer steel. By 1875, the world is producing 1 million tons annually. The age of iron is over. The age of steel has begun. Built in a cramped shed in Sheffield by a furnaceman who touched the converter wall with his bare hand because he didn't trust thermometers.
Worth more than our house on Attercliffe Road.
Nella comes to Baxter House for the first time since the early days. She stands in the doorway, that same doorway, and looks at the converter. It's the same ugly pear-shaped thing, still fire-scarred, still clay-lined, but the casting pit is full of steel ingots worth more than their house, their street, and every chandler's shop in Attercliffe combined. She touches Obed's shoulder, the one with the burn scar from the failed blow. The scar is permanent now, part of him, the way the converter is part of Sheffield, the way cheap steel is about to become part of everything.
The newspaper says there is fraud in the iron trade, so reports. The converter doesn't care about reputation, doesn't read the Times, indifferent to the accusation, indifferent to the vindication.
Obed Harshaw's puddling tongs are still leaning against the workshop wall. He hasn't touched them since the day he arrived. He'll never touch them again. But he doesn't throw them away either. They're a monument, not to stupidity like the pile of failed ingots outside, to the craft that got him here. 20 years of learning iron, so that when a machine came along that could do something iron had never experienced before, there was a man whose hands knew what to do at the moment the thermometer lied. The converter doesn't care about reputation. It doesn't read the Times. It takes iron, adds air, and makes steel. If the iron is right, if the lining holds, if the man at the valve has 20 years of heat in his palms. Bessemer's process was called a fraud because it was given the wrong raw material and expected to perform miracles. When it got the right material, it performed greater ones.